It was a very controversial legislative session because DeSantis attacked everything from abortion to trans rights to education to immigration. They told us that they got the most calls about the CBDC bill than any other issue that they tackled, which was like incredible. Libertarians, which most Bitcoiners are, have a penchant for losing, and they continue that penchant by backing losers. Robert F. Kennedy is definitely a loser in that sense. If I was just a Bitcoin maxi organization, I wouldn't have any money to do anything. They don't really give out money. My job is to get policy passed that helps the businesses here in the state, and I will do whatever it takes to do that. I'll have someone who says, I'm a Christian, but I'm also an anarchist, and it's like, okay, thought about your philosophies in life. You actually understand what you believe.
So do you prefer Sam or Samuel?
Sam's fine. I always type out and write out Samuel just because, I guess, formalities, but people call me a million different things under the sun. So Sam's fine.
All right, let's go. Cool. So, tell us about, I guess, the Florida Blockchain Business Association. How did you get involved in this world? What brought you to Bitcoin, and where are you going?
Yeah, so I guess I got into Bitcoin around 2012, 2013, not in a serious way, but I had a buddy who was like, hey, Sam, this is Bitcoin, this is the future. And I was like, okay, whatever. Don't really know much about it, but that was kind of like my first introduction. Then in 2016, I did research for United States Special Operations Command out of MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, and I was researching whether Bitcoin was being used by ISIS, drug cartels, and essentially they wanted to see how I could shut it down. And so I did that with a few friends of mine, did some research on that for them, and then in 2017, so when I founded my association, which is now, it's the oldest state-focused Web3 Bitcoin Chamber of Commerce in the nation. And we've since passed 5 bills in the state legislature, with our most recent one being the anti-central bank digital currency bill. So we started as a grassroots organization and still kind of are. A lot of what I do is grassroots led. What that means is it's very bottom up. I respond to what my members want as best as I can. And we have a lot of boots on the ground. So even though we're a C6 Chamber of Commerce business focused, we still activate all the meetups around the state of Florida, so we keep in touch with like your average person, not just a business. And then we're obviously well networked on elections, so we always publish a list of pro Web3, pro Bitcoin candidates around the state that we're supporting and fundraising for. So, and we do a lot of fundraising. So I think last session, like we got, I think, let me think. We got over $250,000 in donations on both the congressional level and the state level to candidates that we wanted. So we try to be very effective in that realm.
Well, that's awesome. Like, I mean, arguably right now, in my opinion, best state, best governor, best, just government structure in general. What's been going on in Florida since COVID, it's been incredible seeing what DeSantis has done and what the people of Florida have done, and just the amount of people that have moved in from other places. And it's kind of been interesting because the crypto community, the Bitcoin community, have somehow all congregated in Florida a little bit. And so just hearing what you're capable of doing on the grassroots level just kind of speaks to that. Because, I mean, we know of like Bitcoin Miami, all the stuff that happens in Miami. The mayor of Miami is huge with the Bitcoiners and everything that goes on there. But that speaks to that a lot. I don't know I know I'm just kind of speaking in platitudes and compliments here, but I guess you can kind of give a little more insight being boots on the ground, because I'm in Minnesota. I only can, I hear about these things. I read the stories, but just hearing it from your perspective helps us understand. When did this shift really happen from, would you say like kind of around COVID, or has Florida always been kind of a haven for this movement, so to speak?
It's a good question. I mean, certainly when I started in 2017, Tampa and Miami were still pretty big epicenters. I mean, Miami really has a lot of roots in the Bitcoin sphere. I mean, even if you really want to kind of stalk some of like the Satoshi emails, a lot of those people on those email lists had some attachment to Florida, actually, some of them in Miami. The first government to accept Bitcoin for taxes was in Florida. Ethereum and Litecoin launched from Florida. The oldest Bitcoin hackathons in Florida. The first real world transaction was in Jacksonville to get those Bitcoin pizzas. So that was Florida. So we had a rich kind of history tied to Florida when it comes to Bitcoin in general, which is pretty cool. Yeah. But yes, the COVID shift is really what brought a lot of people here. So traditionally, in the tech world, and crypto included, it's cool to be in Silicon Valley and it's cool to be in New York City. And those types of people, even if they express certain values, always gravitate to where they think it is cool to be. And that was always San Francisco and New York City.
New York, yep.
When COVID happened, it surprisingly wasn't so cool anymore. And then they all came to Florida quietly. A lot of them, even still, it's a typical where in the thick of things, you don't want to speak up. But 6 months later, when all the media attention is off or it's safe to come out and say certain things. So about 6 months after a lot of the lockdowns, or probably a year, people are like, oh, yeah, I've been in Florida the whole time. I secretly moved here 6 months ago, and now I feel safe telling everybody, right? And so we had a lot of people in the Web3 crypto world move here secretively and then more outspokenly come 2021. And then a lot of them stayed and said, hey, we're actually either going to move our business here or our headquarters. So then you saw that whole rush.
Yeah.
And it just exacerbated the situations, I think, in New York and San Francisco. I mean, you have to remember San Francisco and California in general really didn't start opening up until, the end of 2022?
Yeah, approximately.
Yeah, you still even had paranoia. New York City, you still had paranoia. So we only had 2 months in Florida. That's it. And when I say 2 months, I mean even that 2 months was like, oh no, I'm water skiing. It was not that big of a deal. I think we had one day where we had a curfew, or 1 week where we had a curfew. So it was very weird in the sense that everything was normal here. And so a lot of the weird interactions that people had elsewhere in other parts of the country, I just simply have no experience of at all, which is great. But so a lot of people came here and said, hey, okay, this is where I want to set up shop. That momentum is now, fast-tracked things here in Florida by at least a decade.
Crazy. Yeah, no, it was Florida, it was Iowa, and then I'm also going to throw Tennessee in the mix there because I saw a lot of people going to Nashville as well. And then from the crypto space in general too, a lot of people went to Miami, but there's a lot of people that went to Puerto Rico too, which was interesting as well. So that's just crazy, the shift that happened there. And now the southeastern part of the United States is considered to be the highest growing economic region of the country, according to CNBC a couple of weeks ago. So, it makes sense based on all the action that went down there. So,
and it's actually been like that for a while. I mean, you have to understand that all the money is still in Silicon Valley, New York, because of network effects. But it's slowly draining, and because of those network effects, they are exponential. So whatever that trigger moment is, it's kind of like, why is Facebook so big? Because everyone else is on Facebook. Well, eventually, when no one's on Facebook, no one will be on Facebook anymore, And so that will happen in a matter of time, probably at least another decade before all the money says, hey, okay, we're officially done with Silicon Valley, or we're officially done with New York or whatnot. We're setting up shop in Austin or Miami or Nashville or, somewhere in the, North Carolina, right? So all that's happening.
Yep. Yep.
I might have missed this, Samuel, but Sam, you have military connections, or you just independent contractor? What was the relationship there?
It was just a research project. So I was not a part of the military, never have been. I've had family members who are, and a lot of people in my circle are in the military in some way, shape, or form. But I personally have always just been a civilian.
Gotcha.
Did you get reached out to because you knew Bitcoin, or I'm kind of curious how that came about, right? That you researched, Bitcoin for the government.
I just had a lot of good connections, and a lot of people who essentially were like, "Hey, Sam's the guy," and they just put me in there. I was like, okay, here I go. Hey guys.
So it did. I guess if you didn't have military connections, I mean, did that kind of start you on this path of, wanting to be political about it? Do you have any like political background?
Not necessarily. My parents have always been very political, in the sense that like they never ran for office, but were always politically active, protesting one thing or another. When the whole Terry Schiavo thing was happening, they actually brought my family, us as kids, to those protests, right, in Florida. So they were always politically active. And so I always had a political bug. Political conversations were the norm in my household.
Sorry, I'm just to dig a little bit. Like you went from what to then running this, or it's more of a, I guess maybe, I don't know. You said you've passed laws, right? So it is political. It's not just a business association, right? The FBBA. How did you?
Chambers of Commerce are 501c6s or nonprofits with the mission of focusing on business. So like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is one of the biggest lobbying groups in the United States, is a Chamber of Commerce, right? So they focus on business interests, which often means being politically active. Does that make sense?
That makes, okay.
Yeah.
I got it. I see the connection now.
Let's talk about the big topic because I think everybody's interested in this whole CBDC deal in Florida. And I know you were instrumental in that, getting the DeSantis administration to ban CBDCs outright. So what went into that? How long has the process been going on? And, what are the kind of like next steps, I guess, to see that policy continue?
Also, who did you need to educate about the dangers of CBDC? Because I know sometimes in the C-suite of capital, even respectively at the state level, they're not always privy to what's going on from those fronts, technologically speaking. Probably more so in Florida, but just from my experience with politicians, sometimes it's they don't even know what until they're told.
Yeah, so luckily, central bank digital currencies isn't a concept that's very hard to understand. Most of our money is electronic. The idea of authoritarian money is already on the mind of most people. In fact, you can look at people, and from a Christian perspective too. You always hear talk about a one world currency, one world government, stuff like that. And so, in the American psyche, the idea of a one world currency has always been there. And so a central bank digital currency taps into that psyche. I haven't met a politician who doesn't really understand that concept or idea, even if they don't know the technical know-how. When you understand a topic or idea, the technicalities don't really matter. I always tell people I don't need to know how electrons work to know that if I turn on a light switch, the light comes on, right? It's plain and simple. So understanding the concept was incredibly easy. I think it became a hot topic because at the time you had certain bills in other states being passed that were kind of fishy and thinking, okay, is this actually a gateway to FedNow? And this is all during when FedNow was being heavily researched and being prepped to launch, which I believe now it has launched. So there was this idea of, hey, wait a minute, what actually is money? There's nothing wrong with what I would call efficient money, but there is something wrong with authoritarian money. And there's a clear difference between that. So it actually wasn't too hard of a sell. Luckily, it was already during session. So normally, for example, Florida session is 60 days out of the year. And you have committee weeks before that 60 days. And so that is your time period to find a senator and a representative to sponsor a bill. Or if the governor makes your bill a priority, you have all kinds of rule workarounds to essentially get that bill introduced in the middle of the session. So our bill was actually introduced late into session, but passed with flying colors because it was governor priority. So he loved the issue. And they told us, and get this, it was a very controversial legislative session because DeSantis attacked everything from abortion to trans rights to education to immigration. So all your hot button issues that you can imagine that Americans are looking at for like a top 5 voting priority. They told us that they got the most calls about the CBDC bill than any other issue that they tackled, which was like incredible. I mean, I wouldn't have even expected that. I mean, I would have thought abortion would have been like the most calls that you get. Clearly, I mean, that's one of the hottest issues today. But no, it was the CBDC bill. So once they started getting that momentum, they were like, oh, this is a clear game changer and clear winner. As far as in the future, there's not much more to do other than, I would say, wait for a lawsuit. I mean, we have to see how things play out. If the current administration or any future administration says, hey, businesses in Florida, you have to accept this authoritarian money, then the business will have to say, okay, I'm either picking the side with the feds or I'm picking the side with the state. And either the state will protect the business and the state will sue the federal government, or the business will take the side of the federal government and the federal government will sue the state, right? And so it will all come down to lawsuits in the legal system. And of course, as more states pass CBDC bans, then that will just strengthen that case and further bog down the federal government.
So we've had this discussion a little bit amongst ourselves, and we've been trying to follow it on whatever, Twitter and everywhere else. In your opinion, do you consider FedNow to be a CBDC? Do you consider it to be like pre-CBDC? Does your CBDC ban like I don't like? Does it have? Is it related to FedNow in any way? I don't know. As we've seen it roll out, over the last month, or during the last month, and then I don't know. I'm just trying to understand that. So like, will like Florida banks not participate, because it seems to be opt-in at this point? But anyway, I don't know. You've probably researched it 100 times more than any of us did. So opinions on FedNow in general.
So the way you should approach things is the following. FedNow is simply a liquidity platform. It's a way to get better liquidity to banks that need it. That's fine, easy, well said, and good. You're currently seeing multiple businesses like a PayPal come out with their own CBDC products, and FedNow would be a platform in which you could implement a CBDC. So a lot of people will discuss technicalities about, is FedNow a platform for a CBDC? Will it be the next CBDC? In my opinion, it's kind of one of those, who cares? We know what's coming, so you just get ahead of it. So FedNow, technically, just simply a liquidity platform, but easily FedNow could become an application on your phone and then just say, hey, actually we don't need the bank intermediary. You can have the FedNow app on your phone. I mean, technology is incredibly easy. It's the laws that are hard. Our goal would be to ban any kind of authoritarian money that comes our way. So, for example, if they were to use some type of FedNow product to get around Florida's ban, we would simply probably update the law to ensure that whatever they're trying to do is still banned. So it's a nuanced subject, and it's kind of in uncharted territory, because the other question is, do we have a state have the authority to ban certain types of currency? Which some will say no, some will say yes, others will say, I don't care, sue me, right? That's typically what states do when they just decide they don't want to follow the federal government. Marijuana is the easiest case to point to. So,
Yep.
You don't necessarily have to look too much into the weeds to understand concept, where you're going, and then how you want to stop that.
Well, shoot. I mean, just look at things historically. I like going back to like kind of Revolutionary War, when George Washington was visiting all the colonies, essentially saying, hey, I'm president, and how many places rejected him. And then when you looked at when federal currency first got issued, how many states had their own individual currencies and had to factor in exchange rates, et cetera, and just bringing that all under one blanket was a challenge in itself. From that background, looking at the history of money, it's a very interesting topic when you dive into it, and when you understand how radical and cavalier the whole thing was starting out, just in our nascent stages of a country. So that's something we should probably do an episode on sometimes. Put that on the list of future episodes. We have a long list of future episodes. So, but
Sam, I'm kind of curious. Have you ever interacted with somebody or had to argue the point that is actually pro CBDCs?
Yeah, I've had some comments on like a LinkedIn post where people will go, well, CBDCs will help prevent crime, and CBDCs will actually help the underbanked and stuff like that. They pretty much use all the arguments that we would use in favor of a Bitcoin. and they just use it on the CBDC. And CBDCs would be more efficient, right? But they'd also be more authoritarian. So, I think you will see people that are pro CBDC, and that's okay. It doesn't really change any part of the equation.
Where are they from? Delaware?
I actually don't know where they were from, but certainly I could guess some of their political leanings.
That's where, see, that is another future episode. How much of the money is controlled in Delaware? It's all where all the credit card companies are from. It's where all the big banks are headquartered that basically have these exceptions to the rules for whatever the CBDC that will be ushered in. So that'll be interesting down the line.
Yeah, I think there's a lot here with the CBDC discussion, and you brought up the Christian topic, and we've talked to a number of Christians, and it's kind of a reoccurring theme, both in Christian circles but also conservative circles. This concept of getting debanked or getting deplatformed, and a number of people. I think even Brian Brown with the National Institute for the Family. Talks about getting banned from payment processors. Stripe goes and PayPal goes, and people don't realize, but there's really only a handful of these actors out there that can handle these payments. And when they all start going, you very quickly lose access to any sort of financial resources where people can even pay you for services. You basically can't conduct business, right? So with the CBDC topic, we can call it authoritarian money. We can kind of label it all these boogeymans, but really, what is the problem? Well, it's this idea that government can basically tell you where you can or can't spend your money. And going back to, I want to say, what was this, February, March, with all the bank failures? I think there was a couple different opinions. Some people were happy to see some of these banks going under. But you correctly pointed out, of course, that there's only 3 banks that even dealt with crypto companies at the time. And if we lost all 3, it's where is Coinbase going to bank then? You kind of need some of these banks that are maybe friendly to crypto and Bitcoin so that we can live in this dual world that we do. But then on the other hand, it does seem like in a lot of cases, a lot of these payment processors and these banks kind of operate in lockstep, and they're all kind of just towing the same line. So when it comes back to the CBDC discussion, do you really see that the problem is the centralized aspect of it, that is going to be the federal government making these decisions without the bank intermediaries? Is the problem just this concept of maybe a cashless society? Why exactly are CBDCs bad? What do they allow the government to do that they can't do in the current system?
So you could pontificate a billion different ways. So I'll say this. If you believe that your inflation target is 2% and you believe that inflation is a good thing to induce consumer spending, why wouldn't you just get rid of the inflation rate and say the money you have in the bank expires, right? The Bank of England has already mentioned that idea, but that idea is logically in step with our current 2% target with inflation. It's the exact same concept, except you're just saying, okay, instead of devaluing your money 2%, we're actually just taking some of it away. CBDCs would just be a more efficient way to probably implement Keynesian economics. But then also, you could tie it to any political ESG score that you want. That's what DeSantis says pretty often. We already have a pseudo CBDC through the private markets already, just like we don't have a social credit score, but we have a credit score, right? And so your credit score determines a lot about your life, not as much as a social credit score, but it could, right? We don't have an authoritarian digital identity, but we still have Facebook accounts, right? And Facebook is pretty invasive about what your digital identity is. It's no coincidence that you're now needing to verify your actual identities, whether that's your driver's license or your social security number, sometimes for some of these blue check marks on Instagram, Twitter, soon to be Facebook, I'm sure. So CBDC is, I think, a natural conclusion to everything that is already happening and would just be an easier way to implement things that are already happening. People are already getting deplatformed. They're already getting shut out of certain things. Now it would just be easier to do that. You wouldn't have to go through private businesses necessarily to do that. There is an interesting thing to be said about the incentive structure of, say, the banking system and the federal government. Although we like to think that the federal government and the banks are hand in hand, and certainly they in large part are, a central bank digital currency run by the Treasury or the Fed would make you question why you need a bank at all, especially if they can issue that directly to the consumer through an app. Banks know that. Banks aren't stupid, and they need to make sure that they protect themselves or in business. So a CBDC could potentially change the entire way our banking system operates, for good or bad. And so banks are aware of that, and I think that's one of the only reasons you haven't seen central bank digital currencies implemented quicker, is because the banking lobby knows, hey, we need to make sure that we roll this out correctly so that we don't kill ourselves as institutions.
Yeah, to kind of go off of this conversation, I don't know, I guess in my head, the one thing, if the government were to right now, which they probably could, I feel like the banks and the government, I don't know, they seem too hand in hand for my preference, right? But they could start to say, hey, look, we'll just, we're going to charge a 2% fee every year, on money that's been sitting for, over a year. I think the biggest thing against that would be the idea of cash, right? Because if I knew my bank was going to do that, I would just pull it all out and hold cash, because then it's not disappearing, right? And I can still spend it, and I can still everything else with it. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but so obviously Bitcoin's good because it doesn't inflate anyway, right? Cash will still inflate, but it allows for all those privacy aspects, and so whatever, you can't authoritatively, unless they came knocking on my door and seized all my, found and seized all my cash, right? They can't take it away from me at the same way that they could digitally, right? So it is, I think, like you said, this kind of efficiency thing. So anyway, I have been seen in a few places, right? Because especially the way that all these payment things are centralized, right? Anytime you go through Visa or MasterCard, there's this fee that they charge. And I've actually been seeing more and more restaurants in particular that they'll give you a discount if you pay in cash, right? Because then it's actually costing them a certain amount. Anyway, so especially since you work with businesses, I'm curious, again, sorry, this is a ramble of a question, but there seem to be incentives, one, just in general against using the current payment processing systems. But then you could also use blockchain and Bitcoin to bolster those incentives. Do you see businesses being more accepting of Bitcoin, being more simply anti the current system? I don't know. Sorry, that was a real ramble of a question.
Businesses will do whatever they want to do. A lot of businesses have been incentivizing people to give them cash for a very long time. That's nothing new. You will often see gas stations, when you see their little signs, they'll say credit, cash, and debit, and they'll have 3 different prices for gas for each one of those. Obviously, there's differences because of the processing fees. On the second hand, though, a lot of people don't want to hold or deal with cash. And so you have people simply not wanting to deal with cash and willing to pay that fee just so they don't have to have cash on hand. It's a security risk. It's harder for people to calculate. It's slower, even though you can still pay people under the table. So it'll still be efficient in, I think, more crowded areas where you have backhand dealings. And I also think cash will be around because the U.S. would rather criminal activity be done in dollars than something else, right? So that's one reason why we won't necessarily be banning cash, especially $100 bills anytime soon. The $100 bills are the world reserve currency for criminal activity, so to speak, right? The drug trade, human trafficking trade, rare goods trade, it's all done in dollars. And we're okay with that because it's in dollars and not someone else's currency, right? So from the criminal aspect, we certainly would rather not ban cash just so that we know it's still being used around the world. Businesses, they'll do whatever's easiest. I'm sure I know businesses that are accepting Bitcoin, and Lightning is certainly a game changer there. I think a lot of businesses do it more as a novelty right now. and we'll continue to do it as a novelty. It's good to have as a backup plan, and I think a lot of businesses that accept it understand that it is a backup, even if people aren't going to use it right now, and so they're passionate about that. But I think payment and credit card processors are just so easy, and cash is so easy that things will probably continue on as they are now for quite some time.
So, can you say that one more time? Like, so basically, what you're saying is $100 bills are the currency for illegal activity.
Yes.
Okay. See, it's just what I was saying, guys. Like, that's why the $10 bill is valued so much when you go to bars, because everybody wants to pay in 20s, and the bartender needs more 10s than they do 20s. So they're gonna serve you your drink first because you have the 10s. It's different levels of currency for different types of industries determine the value of what the activity is. So it's a ramble on, but not necessarily true. But it was a little psychological study that I did one time in college. Was if I went to the bartender, only used $10 bills because everybody else was paying with 20s, would I get served before the people paying with 20s? And I will say probably 7 to 8 times out of 10, they would come to me first because I had the 10 versus the 20. So it was a fun
And that's
little.
because they needed your 10 to break the other 20s.
Correct. Yeah. There's just a fun little sociology experiment that I.
But how would you
that I did.
advertise that? Would you say, "Hey, I have a $10 bill. Here's
Oh
the
no,
drink I want"?
you just show, hey, you know, everybody's crowded bar, everybody's holding their money or their card, and a lot of times it's 20s when you're in those situations. I used to bartend. Everybody's always trying to pay with the 20 because that's what the ATM spits out. So when you speak currencies, for example, what makes money in the ATM world? $20 bills. So it's
Interesting.
it's all interesting when you look at different industries, how it's not so much the value of the dollar, but it's what dollar value is being used for that specific activity. So I would 100% agree with illegal activity being $100 bills. So I'm sorry, a little side tangent there, but it's just kind of interesting how the value of something is perceived to the individual who is in the process of changing, you know, the money changers, so to speak, and it ebbs and flows depending on the circumstance.
We kind of pivot a little bit, probably.
Yeah.
Samuel, I think.
Yeah,
I think you're Presbyterian, right? So you're probably comfortable with the drinking culture that Catholics are as well. I was raised basically Pentecostal, and we don't like drinking much at all. But yeah, so maybe tell us a little bit about that. Am I right? You're Presbyterian?
Yeah, I'm Reformed Presbyterian. But I still don't drink much. I can drink, but was never super into it.
I don't drink much anymore either. Once you have your I have a 9-month-old. Once you have a 9-month-old at home, your drinking days are done, long gone. So
Well, I don't have kids, but I've never really been that much into alcohol. So
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious about this question. It's on the docket, but we talked about previously. We hosted a Catholic Bitcoiner, and there's been some discussions about things like this on Twitter. But so Bitcoin in politics, a lot of people, especially with the Robert Kennedy campaign, are talking about single issue voting. You know, I'm going to vote for whoever's pro Bitcoin. Obviously, you have Robert Kennedy. You also have what is the other guy's name? Vivek, I think, the Indian guy.
Vivek Ramaswamy.
That's it.
Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah, some people seem to be making this a staple of, or at least a discussion item in the 2024 election is crypto, and are you pro Bitcoin? Are you anti CBDC? What's kind of your opinion here? Do you think that's like a legitimate strategy? Do you think that's going to be a determining factor in the election? And then from a Christian perspective, like, can we even be single issue voters? I know a lot of Christians love Robert Kennedy, but just because of certain aspects that maybe he doesn't have the same opinion on, say, abortion. And I haven't even seen if he's put out an official statement on it, but you just assume because obviously he's running under the Democratic nominee. Even though we love all of his other policies, like we can't be pro Robert Kennedy. Well, at least a lot of Christians would say that. What's your opinion there, Sam? Do you think this is like a legitimate political election talking point?
Okay, so your first question is what? Single issue voting for Bitcoin. Is Bitcoin
Do you
going to
think
be
this
a
is going to
mainstay for the campaign?
do
For
you think
any
that's going to be
campaign?
you think that's going to be important for the
What
2024
yeah, what
election?
and if you had to quantify it, what percentage of impact do you think that's actually gonna push vote a certain way? Because I don't think it's that gonna be as big of a thing as because
Yeah,
the space is still fairly nascent.
yeah, very little. The amount of people who Bitcoin is your number one priority is very small. I always give people the example: if you're a Republican and someone's pro Bitcoin, but they're also pro immigration, pro abortion, pro universal health care, but because they're pro Bitcoin, you're going to vote for them. Not going to happen. On the flip side, if you have someone and you're a Democrat who's pro Bitcoin, they're anti abortion, they're anti illegal immigration, they're anti universal health care, whatever the hot button issue, they're not going to vote for him, right? So if we're realistic, it's not a top 5 issue. It's maybe a top 10 issue, but it's not a top 5 issue for your average voter. People who are backing Robert Kennedy are living in a dream world. A lot of these people, Bitcoiners,
He might be too.
huh?
I said he might be living in a dream world too.
No, he's not. He's got a
No.
very specific plan and mission.
Okay.
I think he's very Trump-esque, where he's a rich guy who's old, who's saying, "Screw it. If I don't do something now, I have nothing to show for my life." And he's not afraid to die, right? So this is his way of going out, making an impact, and getting his last few words in.
Die hard moment.
Yeah, correct. This is his legacy that he's going for, but he's not going to have a debate. He's not going to win. Anyone giving that man money, libertarians, which most Bitcoiners are, have a penchant for losing, and they continue that penchant by backing losers. And Robert F. Kennedy is definitely a loser in that sense. Vivek, I'm more interested in. I don't think he's going to win either. I released a video today kind of talking about some of his strategy on the presidential stage. Vivek is an interesting guy. Probably would be a terrible president and very bad at governing, but he serves a certain purpose, and he's a great speaker. And I have a feeling that if he loses the primary, he might run for the Senate in Ohio because there's a Democrat up for re-election there, or he might stay in Ohio and try to run for something else. Single issue voter, that was your first question. Bitcoin. Second question was, is Christians? Yeah, as a Christian being a single issue voter is pretty stupid. I guess the only thing I would argue is obviously there's clear moral lines around something like abortion. Maybe other issues it's maybe harder to dedicate. So, abortion I get, but like universal health care or immigration, you can make Christian arguments for both of those, right, on either side. And although I would argue one way, I can't exactly tell you, well, the Bible says this about immigration, for example, or be very specific. So certainly you have to look at it holistically. And I think it's dumb to do otherwise, at least personally. Does that answer your two questions?
Yeah. Crypto politics, just in general, though, maybe not a single issue voter statement, but I'm sure you've worked with people on the opposite side of the aisle from yourself,
All the time.
as a lobbyist. And how do you kind of reconcile that with your Christianity? What kind of what are the kind of the qualms that you face in that world?
That's a good question. I don't think it's actually as morally hard as you think. So I'll give you an example. Like, I go to the gym every day and I work out and have gym partners with a variety of different political affiliations. But we don't talk about it. Why? Because our focus is on getting big and lifting weights, right? And some of those guys push me super hard and I push them. And for that hour and a half in which I'm in the gym, nothing else really matters. When you're in the political world, I can get anybody to vote for my bill. and I can do that in a variety of ways because I think my bill is a good bill. So working with certain people who may even not be Christians at all, or maybe even don't like Christianity, well, if they vote for my bill, that's not an immoral thing, I don't think, right? So it's not as hard, I think, as you would think it is.
Yeah, maybe
Selfishly, I just want. Can I ask a selfish question? Where are you seeing the pulse of this? What's your pulse on things being a little bit closer to the political sphere with the primaries going on right now? Because
Like, who do I think is going to win?
well, no, just in general, like, because I'm not even. I don't know what to say right now. I just don't believe polls anymore. I see.
Yeah, you shouldn't.
I see DeSantis. I see DeSantis's actions speaking louder than Trump's words. Tim Scott's the only one speaking fluent evangelicalism right now, and then Nikki Haley's kind of just out there. I don't know. I kind of have a feeling. I know it's between DeSantis and Trump, but ultimately I just don't know what to believe at this point because I hear a lot of different things from a lot of different angles, and I am pretty plugged in myself, but I just like hearing it from other people that kind of live and breathe this stuff a little bit more from working with that area. And does Florida want DeSantis to not be move on from governor and be president? I've heard that some Floridians would rather just have him remain governor, and some are like, some understand the bigger picture of it. So it's
I mean, none of us want him to leave. I mean, certainly if he did, that's okay, but we always joke that we wish he'd use his influence to abolish the 2-term governors and just make it 3 or 4, and then we'd reelect them a third time, right?
Sure.
So people are very big fans. The primary, I wouldn't pay attention to the polls right now. Everything's about momentum. I think the debates will help. I don't think anyone has a chance other than I think Vivek and DeSantis will be it.
Interesting.
Yeah, Scott, Haley, Christie are all losers in a very big way and have zero purpose or chance. They all have their own agendas that really don't serve anything other than trying to raise money and funnel money to their networks.
Well, Christie's there for the McDonald's runs, so
I think Vivek's going to have a lot of problems for a lot of reasons, but
yeah,
Chris Christie's just a disgusting person.
Are you putting Trump out of that equation then?
I dislike Chris Christie far more because he's just disgusting. So it's interesting. If I were you, Americans don't really pay attention till after Christmas. The Iowa primary is in January, so everything you're seeing, it doesn't matter. So much could happen. We have short memories. So come November, look at the polling then, see how you feel. Do your typical gut test, when you're at church or when you're out in public. What are you hearing people say? What are you hearing people see? And are they going, like, I have a lot of people in my gym who are like, I love DeSantis, but I'm still voting for Trump, right? I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I'll poll them, and sometimes their opinions change, but most likely they don't. That's the other thing about these elections is the polls don't really change too much. Mm-hmm. So with Trump's lead, I don't know how I see that closing, although DeSantis's plan, I know what his plan is to slowly build momentum up into Iowa. And so he still certainly has a chance. But I would not waste your time looking at the day-to-day. Your mental capital is better spent elsewhere.
Precisely. That's typically what I tell people too. And I'll say, I know Iowa's interesting, but I think New Hampshire is going to be the breadwinner ultimately for the determining factors. From statistically where the primary winner has come out of, it's usually been the winner of New Hampshire, because that's where the tide shifted when Trump won in 2016, or was when he won New Hampshire after losing Iowa to Ted Cruz. And you can kind of look at a historical trend that way too. But it'll be interesting. One of the more interesting primary cycles in our lifetime, at least. So
it's the biggest election of our life, just like 2020 was, and just like 2016 was, and just like 2012 was, right?
Every election, man. Sick of that tagline.
I know we talked a lot about CBDC, so we're kind of talking blockchain, Bitcoin, crypto, with like as an undertone there. But to be a little more explicit, I'm kind of curious your thoughts. Have you dealt with people like so you're the Florida Blockchain Business Coalition, right? So you're not specifically Bitcoin. You're not, and so I'm curious if have you run into Bitcoin maxis who don't like what you're doing because you're not only promoting Bitcoin? Are you, and maybe your personal thoughts, are you personally a maxi? Are you, or where do you see other cryptocurrencies fitting into all of this?
Yeah.
I know we mentioned earlier, right, that PayPal launched a CBDC type of token. I like, does that fit into your vision of a blockchain future? These private tokens. I don't know. I'm curious. All your thoughts on that.
If I was just a Bitcoin maxi organization, I wouldn't have any money to do anything. So very few of my donations come from Bitcoiners.
Interesting.
They don't really give out money. They might say that they do, and they have gotten better, but they really don't. They benefit from my policies, though, so they're very fortunate that they give me no money, but they benefit from what I do. So the majority of people who have supported my cause since the beginning have been mostly blockchain and Web3 companies. Um, yeah, so certainly a lot of Bitcoin maxis will dislike that. My name's blockchain, or that I'll use terms like Web3. I often I'll tell them to their face, like I kind of treat them like you would a trans person. Like I say, well, tell me what your pronouns are. What terms would you like me to use so that you don't get offended? Because it's pretty much the exact same personality in a lot of ways. So to me, it doesn't matter too much. My job is to get policy passed that helps the businesses here in the state and push an agenda here in the state, and I will do whatever it takes to do that.
Makes sense. I see. Okay, now it makes more sense. Sorry, I think I was off a little bit on this. So you are, yeah, you're representing, you're helping blockchain businesses who, yeah, okay, that makes a little more sense. So I mean, I guess maybe personally, and so we've had this discussion too, right, about currency. Do we need a million digital currencies, right? Bitcoin and every altcoin. Does a token represent something besides a currency? Is it, like as you're representing some of these Web3 businesses, right? They launch a token, it's a governance token, it's a utility token, it's something else. So what's your vision for um, a blockchain future when the US, everybody, you've passed all your laws, everybody, every state is on board, we have a blockchain future. Is everything accepted as currency? Are we still just using Bitcoin, maybe Dogecoin, well, I don't know, as a currency? And I don't know what's the greater vision, I guess.
Okay, what's the greater vision? That's a better question. So
Sure.
my vision is to simply ensure that whatever happens on a federal global level, Florida is safe. And I will do whatever it takes to
Okay.
make that vision possible. So what does that entail? For example, hopefully we're going to be passing a bill this legislative session that ensures that digital gold and silver are recognized as specie in the state of Florida. If you have digital gold and silver, what other things are digital commodities? You get my drift? So that will, and we'll make sure that that digital gold and silver doesn't have to be created by the Federal Reserve. So it can come from anywhere, or maybe it can come from Florida's own chief financial officer or Florida's own treasury, or maybe that treasury can hold on to digital gold and silver and other digital commodities. I want to ensure that we're insulated from a potential dollar collapse in any way, shape, or form. And I also want to ensure that, yeah, we have updated technical infrastructure, whatever that looks like, whether that's using a blockchain or tokens or not. Right? There's multiple avenues to pursue. Other legislation that I'm looking at is, how do we get banks to stop discriminating against crypto Web3 companies? That's certainly top of mind. What about banks actually being able to accept digital assets so that they can hold on to them? Wouldn't that be pretty neat? So that's what I'm working on.
All right.
That's very cool. Go
So
ahead,
we're kind
Kyle.
of wrapping it up here, running a little bit out of time, but maybe we can just hit one last little topic. We talked about Christianity and crypto, Christianity and Bitcoin. I'm kind of curious about your personal philosophy regarding this. Like, why are you in the industry? I know you said you're here to see that Florida succeeds, but it kind of begs the question, I suppose, why? Does your faith inform that? Is there some reason that you think Bitcoin and crypto and these things are prevalent that could maybe help Christians, or is it just business for you?
So I have a really boring answer. I believe that my goal in life is to do whatever God wants me to do and hopefully find that I'm be on the right track. And so he opens the right doors, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Very cheesy answer, but I do believe and I do think it's true. I love what I do. I wouldn't do it otherwise. And I feel like there is definitely a divine mission or purpose behind everything that I do. Even if I didn't think that, of course, there is. Anyway, God doesn't need me to think that for there to be a divine purpose, right? So certainly, it's not like every day when I'm helping a business, I'm like, oh, this is for Christianity, for example. It's not like forward thinking in my mind. It's in the back end, like there is a greater vision or purpose to what I'm doing, even if I don't necessarily see that. Does that make sense?
Of course, it makes sense. I mean, I would say that's kind of why I think all of us are in some way or shape here, right? I mean, you can spin it with the political argument, but most political arguments really come back to the religious aspect of it. Why are we conservative or why are we not conservative? Well, it comes down to your beliefs, right? What you kind of hold to be fundamentally valuable. And we spoke about like Christians getting debanked, conservative organizations getting pushed out of certain institutional systems, and Bitcoin, crypto. These things can offer a lot of opportunities, for Christians that
Yeah.
otherwise we wouldn't have, right? So, and we Matt
Yeah,
and I
my
went
hope
to
would be
yeah.
that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to
Where'd
mention
you
that
and Matt
Matt and I
go?
went to the Thank God for Bitcoin conference, and obviously that is there because there were Christians that are drawn to these things, for very obvious reasons. Yeah. Anyway, continue with what you're going to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal for everybody should be to try to see if your churches will start accepting Bitcoin. I've certainly tried; it hasn't worked out too well. But I still put that bug in some of my pastors' ears sometimes, where it's like, hey, why don't you like take some Bitcoin that I could give you and just hold it on like an official church wallet or something of the sort? Haven't taken me up on the idea yet. And I understand why they haven't, because they're so risk averse and you have to be very careful when you're handling other people's money, right? And so it makes sense. But there's little things we can be doing like that to push that conversation forward. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would help a lot if Christians were using Bitcoin and accepting it. But I also think that there's a lot more Christians in this space than we tend to admit. Kind of like you said, when you're in the gym, you don't really bring up these conversations, with politics and whatnot. It's the same with business, right? We don't really talk about Christianity as much in this sphere, but because of just the nature of the technology and what it's here to do, I feel like there's a lot of Christians, and if you really get down to it, you talk to them, you find out. Well, I mean, what has your experience been? Do you think there's many Christians in this space? You think there's less Christians in this space than there should be? Or
There's definitely a lot of people who believe in a God. There's a lot of people who believe in a divine purpose. There's a lot of people who go to Christian churches for sure. Where it gets tricky is, some of their personal philosophies. You'll have someone who says, I'm a Christian, but I'm also an anarchist. And then it's like, okay, have you thought about your philosophies in life? Do you actually understand what you believe? And I run into that all the time. But yes, there are very large amounts of very influential people who take their Christianity very seriously. And a lot of them are very close friends of mine. A lot of them have been on my board. A lot of them I've done business with, and it has made it very, very fun. Because you see a grander vision and you can talk about things very clearly and intently. And that's very refreshing and very invigorating. in a lot of ways. So there are a lot of Christians, at least currently. I think as adoption grows, there will be less. Whatever adoption means, as more people get onboarded, right? Not necessarily a lot of those people will simply use it for its use, not because of any ideology. But yeah, it is pretty cool. There is a lot of religious undertones to it, for sure.
Sam, where can people get involved with your work? Where can they follow you to see what's going on?
Yeah, so check me out on Twitter. On my Twitter, you'll find, which is just Samuel Arms. Then you can look in my Substack and my link tree. My link tree has my Substack, my TikTok, my YouTube. And then for your business and you want to focus on Florida policy, you can visit my website, which is also on my link tree, which is just FBBA.io, Florida Blockchain Business Association. And that's how you can get more formally boots on the ground involved in pushing Florida policy forward.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on with us. Everybody, check out Sam. This is the Crypto Conversion Podcast. We appreciate you all for stopping by and listening. Hope you all give us a like, comment, review, subscribe, and we will see you all on the next episode. Peace.